Dillian the Body Snatcher White here. It's a champ. Big up to Sporting Icon. Subscribe. Otherwise, I might pay you guys a visit.
So, article in the description box for you guys to go have a read. If you don't fancy reading it, pop over to Sky Sports Boxing here on YouTube and you can watch the Eddie Hearn interview where not only does he talk about this particular subject, but about him being or feeling deflated about the whole Deontay Wilder situation, plus other things as well. And this particular subject that I want to talk about in this video is the Dillian Whyte versus WBC mandatory position. As we know, Dillian Whyte, he's been number one for quite a long time, but yet the WBC put Dominic Breazeale as the mandatory, even though they said that Dominic Breazeale versus Eric Molina would not be for the mandatory, but they then changed it, okay? So, Dillian Whyte's been chasing the WBC for a long time. He's been after that title shot. Reasons being, he wants to get the WBC title and then fight Anthony Joshua for undisputed. So a lot of people who may not be happy with the fact that he turned down Anthony Joshua fight, this is one of the various reasons as to why he turned down a Joshua fight, because he didn't want to just fight Joshua and be the challenger. He wanted to be a champion in undisputed against Joshua. So in my mind, full credit. And it's a risky move, that is for sure. So let's do a little bit of a backstory before we get into the article about what the WBC have done ever since Deontay Wilder has become the champion and with their mandatory positions. Bear in mind, he's been champion for 4 years and only had one mandatory defense. You're supposed to do it at least once a year. Okay, so they're like 3 defenses behind already. Okay, 4 years, only defended it once. Now, let's go back. When Deontay Wilder won the belt, his first mandatory was meant to be against Alexander Povetkin. Povetkin was the mandatory, okay? So, Deontay Wilder lost the purse bid. He had to travel to Russia, okay? And while Deontay Wilder was training, he come here to the UK to get used to kind of like the time zones, because our time zones in Russia are pretty much equal, right? So, he was training here in Sheffield in the UK. Then he gets a phone call, Alexander Povetkin failed a PED test. And before the B sample was even drew, he jumped on the very first plane and said, I ain't fighting him then. Now, what Alexander Povetkin failed to test on was previously legal, and they give the fighters or the athletes a certain period for it to be cycled out of the system. There was still a tiny trace of it in his system, therefore the fight should have went ahead. He was within that kind of limit, but because Wilder just ran away from the fight, because he never wanted to fight anyway, and especially travelling to Russia where he had no choice but to go. So the WBC allowed Wilder to skip that mandatory for a while, or at least postpone it, and as a kind of punishment for Povetkin, although they couldn't officially punish him because, as I said, he was within the legal limit, they said, okay then, how about you defend the mandatory position against Breazeale Stavern? If you beat Breazeale Stavern, you then get a rescheduled title shot against Deontay Wilder. A day or two before the fight between Povetkin and Breazeale Stavern, Alexander Povetkin failed another PED test for a different substance, I believe. And even to this day, there's still some kind of legal ramifications from that, where Povetkin and Rybinski and World of Boxing are actually suing the lab that did it. Apparently the lab was contaminated. Plenty of people were failing tests, not just in boxing, but across other sports, because his lab had some contamination issue. So either way, the Povetkin and Breazeale Stavern fight didn't happen. So rather than Breazeale Stavern having to go fight somebody else for it, they just installed Breazeale Stavern as the mandatory. Bearing in mind, Breazeale Stavern, he lost that title. Listen, he's never been champion anyway, but he lost the title to Deontay Wilder on points. And within a 2-year period, he'd only fought once, and that was against Derek Rossi, where he actually got dropped himself and arguably lost that fight. But either way, he kept his mandatory position. Why? Because his promoter is Don King. Don King and Mauricio Sullivan, the president of the WBC, very clicky. Okay, very good friends. So either way, Breazeale Stavern, he gets a mandatory position without having to do anything. Okay, just because WBC promised him a WBC mandatory position. So there's that one. Okay, Breazeale Stavern gets mandatory without having to do anything. Deontay Wilder, he schedules a fight with Luis Ortiz after Steven Espinoza says, we ain't going to put you versus Breazeale Stavern on Showtime, okay? You're going to have to go fight in some small hall show. We ain't showing it, Wilder. We are sick to death of you fighting nobodies. We actually want to put you on fights where we're paying you well because you're fighting legitimate opponents. And they forced Luis Ortiz on him. So He scheduled a fight with Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz failed the PED test. And at this point, Bermane Stiverne had already been told by WBC to defend his mandatory position against Dominic Breazeale. Now, because Luis Ortiz failed the PED test due to high blood pressure medication, if I get the words out, he then had to get pulled out of the fight. Wilder still had the date. He needed a fight. WBC said, okay, fine. So for the first time in 2 years, guess what? You're going to be fighting your mandatory Bermane Stiverne. So Bermane Stiverne pulls out of the Dominic Breazeale fights, goes and fights Wilder. Dominic Breazeale was left without an opponent after being promised a mandatory position shot. Okay? So the WBC allowed him to fight Eric Molina, who was nowhere even near the top of the rankings, and said, you beat Eric Molina, you become the mandatory. If Eric Molina beats you, he won't be. Okay. So Dominic Breazeale beats Eric Molina. So already the WBC have dropped the ball, even though they promised Dillian Whyte and Eddie Hearn, Molina versus Breazeale is not for the mandatory. Don't worry about it. Yes, Dillian Whyte is number one. He's a WBC champion. Any kind of fight for a final eliminator for a mandatory will involve Dillian Whyte. They didn't do that. They went back on their word. Okay? So, Dominic Breazeale has been waiting around for a year and a half now. So, as of today, Wilder has defended in 4 years his WBC title against a mandatory one time. So now, the WBC, they ordered Dominic Breazeale versus Dillian Whyte, which is what they should have done a long time ago. But they finally order it. So Dillian Whyte is thinking, right, okay, fine, I beat Dominic Breazeale. I can then get the WBC mandatory position. I can then fight the winner of Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, the rematch, after WBC ordered that one. Hopefully everybody's keeping up with this one. So Tyson Fury, he pulls out of the fight, didn't want to take the purse bid, make of that as you want. So the WBC said, right, okay then, I'll tell you what, rather than you have a voluntary defence, we're going to have you fight your mandatory, because you owe us at least 3 mandatory now. As I said, 1 mandatory defence in 4 years is disgusting. You owe us another one. Dominic Breazeale, you're up. So Dominic Breazeale gets pulled out of the Dillian Whyte fight, and now it's going to be fighting Deontay Wilder. So Dillian Whyte is saying, well, okay, so I turned down a Joshua fight for decent money, and I was willing to risk it all to continue the route that me and everybody across the UK want to see, which is me against Deontay Wilder, or WBC champion, get that WBC belt, then have the rematch with Anthony Joshua, but this time it's for undisputed. That rug got pulled out under him. So Eddie Hearn and Dillian Whyte are meeting up with Mauricio Sulaiman, and they're going to be bringing lawyers, etc., with them on Saturday. So basically, they want a resolution. And they're going to be pointing at the fact that Bermane Stiverne got a mandatory position without having to do anything. Dominic Breazeale got a mandatory position without having to do anything. So therefore, why can't I get a mandatory position by fighting my next opponent? If you want, I can choose an opponent, no problem. Or you can force an opponent on me. And I will fight them on June the 13th at the O2 Arena for the mandatory position, but with a guarantee I fight the winner of Wilder versus Breazeale next. This is what they're going for. And they have every kind of source available to them because, as I said to you, which is why I explained the whole Bermane Stiverne and Dominic Breazeale thing, because they did it for them, so they should do it for Dillian Whyte. They should keep up with some continuity. What's wrong with me today? I can't speak. So that's what they're hoping for. As I said, the article is in the description box where Eddie Hearn gives a very, very brief statement, and I'll read it off to you right now before we close this video. Eddie Hearn's statement. It's frustrating. We sent a legal letter to the WBC this week. We actually met Mauricio Sulaiman, the WBC President, who is in town for the Charlie Edwards WBC World Title fight on Sky Sports this Saturday. And we're saying, how can you make Breazeale mandatory? It doesn't make sense. Dillian Whyte is WBC number 1, and more recently, Dillian Whyte was ordered to fight Breazeale for the mandatory position. Everything is set up to suit Deontay Wilder, really, and I believe that Dillian Whyte should be next in line for a title shot at Deontay Wilder. We have a mediation session this Saturday with legal counsels to see what the WBC are going to do to provide a resolution for Dillian Whyte, because he's worked his way up those rankings, and I actually believe the mandatory for the winner of Breazeale against Wilder should be Dillian Whyte. We'll see where we get with that. So that is Eddie Hearn's statement. So what he's saying to you is on Saturday, he's meeting up with Mauricio Sulaiman, who's coming over, because every time a WBC title is on the line, as in Charlie Edwards versus Moreno this weekend at the Copper Box, he's in town, let's have a meeting, let's discuss this whole Dillian Whyte thing, because you dropped the ball, you told us Breazeale would not be the mandatory, then you went back on your word, and then you ordered Breazeale versus Dillian Whyte, and as what you've done in the past with Povetkin versus Stiverne, and then Stiverne against Breazeale, we want the same. We want the same favouritism, if you like. But it's unlikely, though. Well, I'll say it's unlikely. Hopefully it's likely. Hopefully that these people have some kind of integrity and say, right, okay, the winner of Breazeale versus Wilder, you will fight Dillian Whyte. As I said, you owe us three years worth of mandatory. So therefore, you're going to do mandatory back to back. You're going to fight Dominic Breazeale. If you get past Dominic Breazeale, you're going to fight Dillian Whyte. If Dominic Breazeale beats Deontay Wilder, it's a mandatory. No need for a rematch. No need for a rematch clause whatsoever, because it's not a voluntary. Dominic Breazeale, you will fight Dillian Whyte to defend your title against him next. That would be the ideal situation. Then hopefully whoever it is, Dillian Whyte beats, and then we get to see Joshua versus Dillian Whyte for undisputed. So that's what's going on. Hopefully people managed to keep up and understood some of the backstory of it all. Anyway, drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, and of course subscribe. Catch you all on the next video.